that the essay was written in 1970s when second wave of feminism was at its peak and American academia had acknowledged women's writing as a legitimate field of study. It was a time when many feminists consciously stopped being passive consumers of meanings produced by men writers and they actively involved in studying female text, analyzing women writing styles, themes, history of women writing, also trajectory of female literary career. In other words, they looked forward looked towards establishing gynocriticism. But they had a question before them. How would they analyze the women's text? K.K. Ruthven, in Feminist Literary Studies, an introduction writes that feminists shifted from negative task of exposing androcentric biases against women to more positive task of defining the specificity of women's writing. And it is this specificity of women's writing Showalter will be talking about in her four models of difference. Till now, feminist critics had to depend upon androcriticism, and in order to analyze female writing, they would need a methodology which is women oriented, women centric, and covers all subjects right from women's writing style to women literary career. Showalter's essay was in response to this demand, wherein she develops four models of difference. And these models of gender differences are biological, linguistic, psychoanalytic, and cultural. Biological model studies impact of sex on writing. The text is always marked by the body. This is its belief. This model of gender difference takes feminist critics to two types of theories of art, phallic and ovarian. Showalter mentions that in Victorian era, physicians believed that due to women's physical functions like pregnancy and menstrual cycle, they become less creative than men. And Victorian anthropologists believed that frontal lobes of the male brain were heavier and more developed female than those of female. Therefore, women were inferior in intelligence. If we apply these findings to literary process, then women have been condemned as less creative and therefore they are blamed to have produced inferior literature. They believed in superiority of male sex and the entire male literature therefore is marked by this superiority. Gynocritics reject this belief, the belief for biological inferiority of women. Showalter mentions that literary process has often been equated with gestation or pregnancy, even during Victorian era. Gynocritics no doubt accept the basic biological differences that women, due to reproductive functions, are naturally mothers and homemakers, but they fail to believe that this biological difference can be source of difference in ability and aptitude. What they mean to say that being homemaker or mother doesn't mean that women cannot write good literature. Gynocritics believe that women are biologically different from men, but they argue that this difference is not shameful. Rather, it needs to be celebrated. So most urgent concern of gynocritics is woman's autonomy over her body, and they insist that it is time to take biological difference seriously. Woman's body is a great source of energy for women's writing. Her experiences based on her body are equally fulfilling, enriching, and satisfying. So it is important to study biological imagery in women's writing. Means how women express their bodily image in literature, that is important. This presentation of physical experience in writing would create a new reality and a new history. Next model is linguistic model of women's writing, and it studies whether men and women use language differently, whether sex difference in language use can be theorized in terms of biology, socialization, or culture, whether women can create their own language, or whether speaking, reading, and writing are all gendered marked. These are important issues for gynocritics. And before I explain them in detail, let's understand how language, which is created, constituted, and dominated by men, has trapped women. For that, we need to understand how language is androcentric. Take some words like man, author, actor, etc. And when we say man is mortal, we are told that it not only talks about men but women also, that the word man is gender neutral. But we cannot write woman is mortal and say woman is gender neutral. Many times we use actor, author, etc. for women also. Secondly, we cannot imagine woman as God. We are socially conditioned in a way to imagine God only as male. In this way, through history, men have created norms and rules for women's language. What should be spoken by women have been decided by men. Women cannot talk about sexuality. When a man writes, his language is hailed as authoritative, but women's words are less believed. Women cannot decide the meaning, they are decided by men. In this way, women have been deprived of expression and pushed further to silence. And this is called oppressor's language, and women speak as a foreign language. As an antidote, gynocritics like Mary Jacobus proposed to modify and write within the male discourse by deconstructing language to write what cannot be written. Many others wish to work on communicative strategies so that women get equal access to language. Therefore, the appropriate task for feminist criticism is to concentrate on women's access to language. The problem is not that language is insufficient to express women's consciousness, but that women have been denied full access to it. Gynocritics are in search of a language which does not make them silent but loosen their tongue, because only by entering language they will enter the history. In third model, psychoanalytic model, Showalter writes that psychoanalytically oriented feminist criticism locates the difference of women's writing in the author's psyche and in the relation of gender to the creative process. It means that being a female affects writing process. The aspect of female psyche includes biological and linguistic models of gender differences, as the body shapes the psyche. But when it comes to studying women's psyche and women's creative process, we have to see first how woman is dealt in psychoanalysis. Freud's theory of sexuality is entirely focused on the possession of phallus. Man is man because he has penis, but woman because he does not have it is inferior. She is a lack, a negative of man. The anxiety due to this lack of self and identity is believed to be the cause of inferiority in her writing. So Freud considers woman as inferior and passive. He said penis envy is universal in women. Later on, Jacques Lacan regarded the phallus as key source of power in language and being, which treat men as the norm and women as the other. In his essay, The Relation of the Poet to Daydreaming, Freud maintained that unsatisfied dreams and desires of women are chiefly erotic. And these are the desires that shape the plots of women's fiction. But in contrast, dominant fantasies behind man's plot are egoistic, ambitious, as well as erotic. Gynocritics reject women as lack, passive, and inferior. Showalter mentions good alternatives to Freudian psychoanalytic theory and say that critics are thinking about the possibility of a new feminist psychoanalysis. In this regard, Nancy Chaudreau, the reproduction of mothering, psychoanalysis, and sociology of gender is worth mentioning. In it, Chaudreau revised traditional psychoanalytic concepts of differentiation, the process by which the child comes to perceive the self as separate and to develop his ego. Since differentiation takes place in relation to the mother, who is the primary caretaker, that means the ego is of the child develops in relation to the mother, not the father. A boy learns his identity negatively, means not same as mother, but girl's core gender identity is positive and built upon sameness, continuity, and identification with the mother. Development of feminist psychoanalysis will have profound impact upon the gynocriticism and critical interest in mother-daughter configuration as a source of female creative power is one area where gynocritic criticism can work. So gynocritics uh, are interested in sisterhood. The idea of sisterhood stands as symbol of uh, rejection of powerlessness that women feel due to oppressive social and cultural structure. So the segment, last section, last model, cultural model is very important because it incorporates the idea of sisterhood. Showalter prefers the model because theory of culture incorporates ideas about women's body, language, and psyche, but interprets all these three in relation to the social context in which they occur. According to this mode, what women think of their bodies, language they use, and what they think of their emotions are highly dependent upon social environment in which they live. Therefore, women's psyche is a product of culture in, in which she lives. What Showalter means by this is that how a South Asian female thinks and expresses herself is different from how a white female thinks and expresses herself because they belong to different cultures. So, gynocritics are most interested in women's culture. In order to explain women's culture, she takes help of Ardener's diagram. It's a diagram of relationship between dominant group and muted group as shown in the slide. Dominant group and muted groups are shown as intersecting circles. Much of the muted circle Y falls within the boundaries of the dominant circle X. Circle X is male world, patriarchal world. Circle Y is women's culture. There is a crescent of circle Y which is outside the general group. This is called wild zone. This is wild zone of women's culture, spatially, experientially, and metaphorically. Spatially because it is entirely women's zone, experientially because it stands for aspect of female lifestyle which are outside of and unlike of men, metaphorically because it has no corresponding male space since all male consciousness is within the circle of dominant structure, means to say what is purely men's have been accessible because men have written much about themselves in philosophy and psychology. Women are aware of the unconscious aspect of men's culture through various myths and legends. But men cannot reach women's unconsciousness. They are aspects of women's culture completely inaccessible or incomprehensible. That is why it is called wild zone. Many feminist critics advocate that this wild zone must be the address of a genuinely women centric criticism, theory, and art, so that the silence of women could be turned into expression. Showalter mentions many writers like Elaine Showalter and Margaret Atwood who tried to explore women's culture and create mythologies. But at the same time, Showalter warns that there is no writing or criticism totally outside of dominant structure. No publication is fully independent from the economic and political pressure of male dominant society. Therefore, Showalter calls this wild zone a playful abstraction. Women writing is a part of dominant group as well as part of muted group. It is a double voice discourse. So every step of feminist criticism is towards self understanding and self fulfillment. In her essay, Showalter nowhere advocates for a separation of the female tradition from the male tradition. The focus of gynocriticism is on nurturing a new feminine cultural perspective within a feminist tradition that at the same time exists within the male tradition but is not dependent upon it. To sum up, Showalter's essay stresses the study of differences in women's writing. She is of the view that creative writing can never be sexless or androgynous, in that the gender of the writer is always reflected in the writings. Thank you for watching.